Welcome to everyone. I'm very glad to moderate today these interesting side events with excellent speakers. It is organized by Mayors for Peace, Nuclear-Free Local Authorities, and ICANN. And my name is Thomas Heinutzi. I'm an executive advisor of Mayors for Peace and a former Austrian disarmament diplomat. And this webinar has the title Building a Nuclear Weapons Free World, the TPNW States Parties Conference and the Role of Cities, Key Institutions and Civil Society. And it expresses already that you cannot build a nuclear weapons free world without a legally binding norm to prohibit nuclear weapons. And this binding norm is, of course, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force on the 22nd of January this year. And we are very fortunate to have opening remarks of the President of Mayors for Peace, Katsumi Matsui, the mayor of Hiroshima. So we will now listen to him.
Warm greetings from Hiroshima. I'm Matsui Kazumi, Mayor of Hiroshima and President of Mayors for Peace. It is a great pleasure for me to deliver a message for the webinar, Building a Nuclear Weapons-Free World. Thanks to efforts by many people, including the Hibakusha and other people who share a hope for a world without nuclear weapons, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entered into force this January, and the first meeting of states parties to the TPNW is scheduled to convene next March. However, let us consider the international state of affairs. Amid escalating economic competition between states, nuclear-armed states are upgrading and modernizing their nuclear arsenals. They are concerned of an outbreak of violence that completely rejects peace. Not since the Cold War has such tension between nations been felt. Mayors for Peace has been taking various initiatives with the aim of encouraging policymakers to shift from policy rooted in national security and the exploitation of the existence of violence to policy rooted in human security and the ideal of peaceful coexistence. In order to facilitate this policy change, it is essential to build a consensus in civil society in favor of the abolition of nuclear weapons, a symbolic manifestation of violence. To build this consensus, we believe we need to promote a culture peace, a culture in which each person takes actions grounded in a wish to maintain a peaceful, non-violent daily life. This webinar is held jointly by the European Chapter of Mayors for Peace, NFLA and ICANN, with the participation of Mr. Alexander Clement, President-designate of the first meeting of states parties to the TPNW, as well as Mayors for Peace member cities, international organizations, and civil society groups that work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. I believe that this initiative will contribute to the promotion of a culture of peace aiming to cultivate peace consciousness and cause the culture of peace to take root widely in civil society. I would like to pay my heartfelt tribute to this meaningful initiative. The road to abolition will not be smooth, but I trust that if we in civil society continue tireless efforts for the realization of everlasting world peace, we can definitely create great momentum toward peace. In closing, I extend my best wishes for the success of the webinar, Building a Nuclear Weapons-Free World, and for the continued good health and luck of all in attendance.
I thank Mayor Matsui for his opening remarks. Since this event is organized by the European chapter of Mayors for Peace, we invited 3 representatives of European states parties to the TPNW to address us. And the first one is now the Foreign Minister of Malta, Evariste Bartolo.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. Malta commends the extensive efforts of the Mayors for Peace and the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons in working towards nuclear disarmament, especially your recent engagement regarding the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Our endeavors have become increasingly significant in the context of current international relations. Indeed, Malta is deeply concerned by the recent deterioration of major disarmament architecture and the worsening conditions of the security environment as we are witnessing tensions only paralleled during the Cold War. In this regard, the recent entry into force of the TPNW and the fact that the first meeting of states parties is fast approaching come as a ray of hope and a source of encouragement at a time when the hard-earned gains in our pursuit of peace and prosperity appear to be diminishing. Distinguished guests, Malta signed the TPNW on August 24th and ratified it on September 21st, thereby becoming one of the first 50 ratifications bringing the treaty into force. Despite disagreement with some of our international partners on the initiative's perspective, we are proud to have stood by our long-standing foreign policy principle to strive for nuclear non-proliferation and global nuclear disarmament. Our commitment to the TPNW is driven by the understanding that no state, big or small, possessing nuclear capabilities or not, is immune from the array of humanitarian consequences if these weapons were to be deployed again. No state is immune to the climate disruption, economic collapse, mass human displacement, and famine that would inevitably follow. Today, there are over 13,000 nuclear warheads worldwide. They are much more powerful than those used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed over 340,000 people within 5 years. Other hundreds of thousands have since then been killed or contracted cancer and other diseases due to nuclear production, accidents, and testing. The exact number of casualties is a closely guarded secret. Last year, during COVID-19, the 9 countries that currently possess nuclear weapons collectively spent $72 billion on modernizing their nuclear arsenals. But the world leaders did not find the required $50 billion to bring the pandemic to an end faster in the developing world, where only 2% of the population has been vaccinated. We believe that the treaty serves to fill a legal gap in the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, uniquely outlawing nuclear weapons. The TPNW complements and supports the TNP's nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation objectives. It represents a concrete step towards implementing the NPT's obligation to pursue negotiations on effective measures for nuclear disarmament and a significant pledge to the preservation of international humanitarian law, including environmental remediation and victim assistance. Malta will continue to urge all states to join the TPNW as universalization of the treaty is key in sending a strong political message and strengthening global norms. It serves as an instrument to setting the record straight that nuclear weapons are the very embodiment of power, terror, and intimidation. Dear friends, Malta believes that it is our shared duty to promote the benefits of such a treaty, help fight misconceptions about it, and ensure that its obligations are adhered to. Malta looks forward to the meeting in March next year. We view this as an opportunity to collectively commit to implement obligations under the treaty. Apart from signaling operational efficiency, a successful first meeting of state parties of the TPNW has the potential to generate momentum on disarmament issues. Our motivation is to take forward the treaty as a multilateral success story and another core element of the disarmament architecture. Our shared spirit of cooperation and goodwill will come in good stead to establish a legacy of goodwill and the renewal of our commitment to improve the lives of societies of today and tomorrow. Nuclear weapons have always been immoral, now they are also illegal, and rightly so. Thank you.
I thank the Foreign Minister of Malta, and the floor now goes to Cardinal Silvano Tomasi, the former ambassador of the Holy See to the UN in Geneva, who played a crucial role also in bringing about the treaty.
Dear friends, first of all, I wish to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to share the commitment of the Holy See in pursuing the goal of building a nuclear weapon-free world. Throughout my years in diplomatic service for the Holy See, and especially in my capacity as permanent observer at the United Nations in Geneva, I have always found mayors for peace engaged with realism and professionalism in ensuring the benefits of peace for their cities. On last September 28, 2021, we celebrated the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons as an occasion to impress on the world, and particularly on the leaders of nuclear weapon states, humanity's insistent demand for the elimination of nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war. As noted by the Holy See representative on that occasion, two factors contribute to the perpetuation of nuclear status quo. The first is the policy of deterrence, which drives the arms race and generates a dehumanizing technological environment that sustains and aggravates mistrust among nations. We must make our own the insight of Pope John XXIII, that true and lasting peace among nations consists not in equal supply of armaments, but in mutual trust alone. Trust among nations warrants verification, and the Holy See strongly endorses verifiable disarmament agreements. The second factor is the exorbitant spending by a few states in the production and deployment of nuclear weapons, which is a source of growing inequality both within and across nations. Faced with a global pandemic of uncertain duration and the worsening effects of global climate change, states must reduce military expenditures in the interest of meeting humanitarian needs and the demands of our common home. Pope Francis sums up this concern in the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, all brothers and sisters. With the money spent on weapons, the Pope says, and other military expenditures, let us establish a global fund that finally put an end to hunger and favor development in the most impoverished countries, so that their citizens will not resort to violence or illusory solutions, and have to leave their countries in order to seek a more dignified life. The first words of the UN Charter make a strong commitment to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which has brought untold sorrow to mankind. It is long overdue, therefore, that the international community make good on its determination. Consequently, at this moment of difficulty in the international community, the Holy See has intensified its long-standing diplomatic and pastoral commitment toward the implementation of the evangelical beatitude, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Thus, one of the first priorities of the Dicastery for promoting integral human development of the Holy See was the holding of the International Symposium, Perspective for a Nuclear-Free World and for an Integral Disarmament, held in the Vatican on November 10-11, 2017. The rejection of nuclear weapons, as Pope Francis said, the threat of their use as well as their very possession is to be firmly condemned. The Pope noted that until recently, arms control policies were mainly handled by interstate diplomacy or by international accords. Today, we are witnessing a growing awareness that each individual person and all people collectively are involved in arms control. Thus, the concept of humanitarian disarmament, which is spearheaded by civil society groups with membership spanning the globe, is a people-centered approach to disarmament. It focuses on preventing and healing human suffering and environmental harm, rather than on only advancing national security. The dialogue on integral disarmament, which calls for every person to disarm his or her own heart and to be a peacemaker. In this regard, Pope Francis never ceases to emphasize the need for discernment in assuming moral responsibility to recover international trust and promote peace for individuals, communities, and the states. Such an integral disarmament involves the acknowledgement of guilt and mistakes and the duty to repair the damage caused by nuclear weapons, and can transform a culture of injustice and violence into a culture of fraternal peace and the advancement of human rights. It takes us beyond peace conventions and treaties to personal and communal conversion and change of heart, toward a culture of encounter for a civilization of love and political friendships, toward a development that cares deeply about God's creation in its totality. Furthermore, I would like to recall that the Holy See appreciates the UN Secretary General's announcement in May 2018 of this agenda for disarmament, securing our common future. The agenda outlines a set of practical measures to promote disarmament in the areas of weapons of mass destruction and conventional arms, and to discourage the development of weapon technologies for the future. Another positive sign was given when the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ECAN, which co-sponsors this webinar, was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in October 2017. This award recognizes ECAN's role in shedding light on the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons, and for its long campaign in support of the UN Treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons. This treaty was supported by the Holy See, which became one of the leaders in the drive to adopt the treaty, sign and ratify it. Pope Francis' recent visits to Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been an additional symbol of the disastrous consequences of nuclear weapons, and an invitation to explore together new ways to enhance mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence on Earth, our common home. And this is the hopeful way to the future. Thank you.
I thank the Cardinal for his words, and the Holy See will now be followed by Ireland, a nation that already for decades is a strong voice and actively engaged in nuclear disarmament. And I'm very happy that we have here Orleth Fitzmaurice, the Director of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Ireland. Orleth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Thomas. And my sincere thanks to Mayors for Peace, to the nuclear-free local authorities, and to ICANN for organising today's important discussion. It's very difficult to follow the previous speakers, but I shall try. As you know, Ireland, like many other countries represented on this call, was among the first 50 states to ratify the TPNW, depositing our instrument of ratification on the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima in August 2020. Ireland has been with the TPNW since the very beginning. Together with key partners, we brought forward the UN resolution to negotiate a new legal instrument for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, leading to their total elimination. This was motivated by the desire to provide a legal path for the fulfilment of NPT Article 6 obligations and to close the legal gap referred to in the Humanitarian Pledge, with nuclear weapons being the only category of weapons of mass destruction not to be prohibited. Nuclear disarmament has been a fundamental part of Ireland's foreign policy, as you referenced, since the earliest days of our UN membership. and it remains one of our 5 signature foreign policies today. The NPT itself had its origins in the Irish resolutions put forward in the 1950s and 60s by our then Foreign Minister, Frank Aiken. This was driven by global fears, particularly in smaller nations, about the existential threat posed by the unchecked proliferation of nuclear weapons, exacerbated by the context of increasing international tensions and growing awareness of the impact of nuclear weapons testing. Already at this time, although we probably use different words to describe it, the efforts were driven by a concern also about the very evident catastrophic and unmanageable humanitarian consequences of a nuclear weapons detonation. These same concerns, almost 50 years later, motivated Ireland to work for the adoption of the TPNW. Our continuing commitment to multilateralism drove our work with other concerned states and multi-stakeholder partners to make progress on nuclear disarmament, where in recent decades, unfortunately, progress has been stagnant. The NPT had always envisaged a separate legal instrument to give effect to the disarmament obligations in Article 6, and now the TPNW provides this. In my view, the momentum on the TPNW, in particular the rate of ratifications and the widespread support, are evidence of the international community's commitment to rid the world of these destructive weapons. Domestically, within Ireland, there is a consistently high level of political and public support for nuclear disarmament. Ireland is not a member of any military alliance, and nuclear weapons play no role in our security policy. We have been honoured to have received visits from Habakasha, including in recent years, and their testimony of survival and their hopes for a nuclear-free future are something that have resonated deeply with the Irish people. As well as adopting legislation to prepare for TPNW ratification, Ireland's National Parliament held a debate in December 2020, marking both the 50th anniversary of the NPT and the then imminent entry into force of the TPNW. Across all parties, parliamentarians expressed their strong support for Ireland's continued work on disarmament, highlighting in particular the need to educate the next generation on nuclear issues. They also noted the vast resources being spent each year on nuclear weapons, as many of the previous speakers here have, which could be better directed to the benefit of humanity. That Parliament chose to combine these 2 treaties in one debate demonstrates that Ireland's commitment to the NPT remains unwavering, and our support for the TPNW is fully compatible with that. We want to see not just universalisation of both treaties, but also full implementation, including full implementation of Article 6 of the NPT. Our position is based on our long-standing belief in a rules-based international order and the important, essential leadership role for small states within that. Nuclear disarmament is the responsibility of all NPT states parties, large and small, nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states alike. I'm greatly looking forward to Vienna, to the first meeting of states parties in March next year, where the states parties to the TPNW will set out concrete plans for the full implementation of the treaty's humanitarian-centred objectives. Ireland is actively engaged in the excellent preparations led by Austria, and we're hoping for an open and inclusive meeting. We encourage all states not yet party to the TPNW to join the meeting as observers. We welcome very much those who have already expressed their intention, and we encourage in particular those who do not support the treaty to engage and to contribute to the debate. I've heard the TPNW described in some circles as an act of frustration, a response in frustration to slow progress in the NPT context. But that is to paint a picture of the TPNW that I don't think is accurate and I don't think is fair. Rather, the TPNW represents optimism, momentum, progress in a field where it's badly needed. Speaking of Nobel laureates, as we did earlier, Seamus Heaney, one of Ireland's literary Nobel laureates, once wrote, "History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope in history rhyme." The pandemic has shown us how interconnected we all are, and most crucially, the need to cooperate to solve global problems. We've also seen just how quickly seemingly unlikely risks can materialise with devastating global consequences. In the face of these lessons, we cannot in good conscience fail to address the existential threat posed by the very existence of nuclear weapons. These indiscriminate weapons afford none of us any security, and the only way we can guarantee safety of humanity and of our planet from their catastrophic humanitarian, societal and environmental consequences is their total elimination. TPNW provides us with this pathway, and in this way, we hope it will indeed make hope and history rhyme. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olive, for your address, and also referring very clearly to the relationship between the NPT and the TPNW, because you cannot really fulfill the obligations of the NPT without this prohibition norm, which is the TPNW. And you also referred to the forthcoming meeting of states parties, and therefore it's particularly good that we have here today Ambassador Alexander Gment, the President-designate of the first meeting of states parties of the TPNW that will be held in Vienna in March 22. And he will now give the keynote address. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Can you just note if you can hear me? I hope the connection is okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to participate in this webinar organized by Mayors for Peace, nuclear-free local authorities, and ICANN. And of course, it is actually quite difficult to add to the excellent contributions from the previous speakers. Nevertheless, let me say a few comments first about the TPNW and its importance, and before I then speak about the preparations and the expectations for the first meeting of states parties. The TPNW entered into force, of course, last January, and this is a milestone in multilateral diplomacy, and it's a paradigm shift in international efforts to resolve the nuclear weapons problem. Already the first resolution of the General Assembly in 1946 advocated the complete elimination of nuclear weapons. So for the first time after more than 70 years, the Ban Treaty now sets a comprehensive and unequivocal international legal norm prohibiting these weapons, thereby closing an important legal gap. And this norm is explicitly based on the catastrophic humanitarian effects of nuclear weapons and the great risks that current nuclear policies and the collective practice of nuclear deterrence entails. The increased international focus on the humanitarian dimension and risks of nuclear weapons of the past few years has provided evidence that these effects are even much more serious, complex, and long-lasting than was previously assumed. And such consequences are, of course, unacceptable if only one nuclear weapon is exploded, but they are unimaginable if a nuclear conflict occurs. At the same time, the risks in connection with the possession of these weapons and the misguided belief in the security and stability of nuclear deterrence are much more considerable than the public is largely aware of. And these are not only the risk of nuclear escalation on conflict, but also the risks of miscalculations or accidents caused by technical or human error. New technologies such as artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and cyber vulnerabilities of nuclear systems add further disconcerting layers of risks. The TPNW follows the logic that there are no right hands for the wrong weapons, as former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon put it so well in 2013. The treaty is thus, as was already pointed out, an essential normative supplement and further development to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which also includes an obligation to nuclear disarmament. But this obligation has, of course, not been fulfilled 50 years since the treaty has come into force. Nuclear weapon states seem unwilling or unable to take the directional steps away from the precarious belief that nuclear deterrence can be a sustainable foundation for stability and security. And this belief is, as we can point to evidence, is to the detriment of the security of all. Unfortunately, the position of states that rely on nuclear deterrence through so-called nuclear umbrella, which of course is in reality an inappropriate expression, also enable the persistence of this precarious status quo. The TPNW now establishes a clear prohibition norm that is directed against these weapons of mass destruction per se. And in this way, the treaty underscores that the overwhelming majority of the international community no longer sees the nuclear status quo and the permanence of the nuclear sword of Damocles over all our heads as legitimate. In addition, the clear prohibition norm forms the legal basis from which actual disarmament steps can be taken, as was the case with other weapons of mass destruction or mass humanitarian harm, such as chemical weapons, biological weapons, anti-personnel landmines, or cluster munitions, where first these weapons were prohibited under international law, which was then the basis for the subsequent elimination of these weapons. Now, nuclear weapons have traditionally been a very contested subject in international community along the divide of those who think that these weapons are a sustainable means to ensure stability and a guarantor of peace and security, and those who think that nuclear weapons threaten the undiminished security of all humanity and are morally repugnant and must therefore be eliminated. And the TPNW has not created this contestation. It has simply provided legal clarity by asking very clearly the question where one stands on this issue. And this question is based on a very compelling and strong set of arguments related to the humanitarian consequences and risks. So there is very little space of obfuscation. And regrettably, but maybe not unexpectedly, those who still believe in the importance of nuclear deterrence do not like the TPNW. They do not like to be confronted with the humanitarian and risk arguments on which they may not have very convincing answers. And they do not like the transformational potential of the TPNW in terms of its possible impact on the legitimacy and legality of the nuclear weapon status quo in international relations and in the eyes of the international community. There has in fact been very little engagement by nuclear armed states on the arguments on the humanitarian consequences and risks. Instead, we've seen criticisms of alleged shortcomings of the TPNW, and one of those claims was even alleging incompatibility between the TPNW and the NPT, which of course is totally unjustified. Let me just say that the TPNW is not only intended to give more urgency and credibility to nuclear disarmament under the NPT, it also strengthens the taboo against nuclear weapons, obviously with its focus on the unacceptability of humanitarian consequences and risks of nuclear weapons. So thereby the TPNW is not only a nuclear disarmament treaty, but it's also a key non-proliferation measure in line with and supportive of the NPT non-proliferation disarmament objectives. So in my opinion, criticisms that we hear are part of a politically motivated deflection strategy to avoid actual engagement with the serious security concerns expressed by the vast majority of states regarding nuclear weapons, which have of course motivated the TPNW and which are based on the humanitarian risks, the humanitarian consequences and risk arguments that have been developed. Of course, this is also a short-sighted strategy because nuclear weapons issue can only be addressed if the international community works together. So the refusal to engage with the clearly articulated concerns of the majority of states and the compelling and perfectly legitimate questions and concerns regarding the humanitarian consequences and risks is not a very meaningful and constructive approach. And I hope that opponents of the TPNW or skeptics of the TPNW will adopt a more engaging approach in the future. But of course, such engagement needs to be genuine and it needs to be based on an equal footing. Now, the entry into force of the TPNW is, of course, only the first step. The task is now to strengthen this young treaty and its normative power. Excuse me. It was adopted in 2017 by 122 states, and 56 have ratified it to date. But let's not forget that 135 states supported the humanitarian pledge for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons in 2016, and 159 states co-signed the humanitarian statement that was held at the 2015 NPT review conference. So the concerns and the arguments on which the TPNW is based are very broadly shared indeed by the overwhelming majority of the international community. Now, every additional treaty accession is an opportunity to demonstrate that the international delegitimization of nuclear weapons is getting bigger and clearer. And with the progressive strengthening of the treaty and the greater commitment by civil society, TPNW arguments will change the discourse on nuclear weapons and generate additional pressure to actually and seriously implement the disarmament obligations to which nuclear weapon states are bound to by the NPT. This is, of course, where civil society, Mayors for Peace and others can make a tremendous contribution. The important discussion about nuclear weapons and the humanitarian impact needs to be brought to the citizen level, to the citizens of cities, where the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and the human suffering would, of course, be most devastating. We need a broad societal engagement with this topic to help move governments to adopt the right policies. This discussion should take place at the community level, just as much as today the issue of climate change is no longer discussed in the abstract, but is very much and intensely discussed at the local level. So I hope that also the Mayors for Peace network will provide a framework to bring the nuclear weapons issue much closer to the public than it currently is. Dear participants, next March, the first meeting of states parties will take place, and I've been given the great honor and responsibility of presiding over this meeting and facilitate its preparations. And they have been going very well despite the limitations imposed on us by the pandemic. States parties and signatories of the TPNW have been very clear that they take this conference seriously. They want to use this opportunity to put the implementation of the treaty on a strong and solid track. So we hope at the first meeting to send a strong political message refocusing on the humanitarian consequences and risks of nuclear weapons. This will be an opportunity for states and civil society to underline the importance of the humanitarian rationale of the TPNW. And we will do this, send this message with confidence about the strength of our arguments and with readiness to engage constructively with those who are not yet convinced about the treaty. One very important aspect of the TPNW and clearly a focus of our work are the positive obligations of the treaty of assisting victims and addressing the environmental remediation of nuclear weapons. The Hibakusha and victims from communities affected by nuclear weapons testing campaigns have played such an important role in making this a strong element of the TPNW. And this is a treaty aspect that all of us take very seriously. There are several state parties and signatories who have been deeply affected by nuclear weapons testing and whose communities suffer the dreadful consequences of this to this day. The TPNW gives a strong focus and a legal recognition to these victims, and we will strive at the conference first meeting of states parties to establish what was called a culture of work to implement these provisions in a cooperative way. There are also important decisions we need to take regarding deadlines, which the first meeting of states parties was tasked by the negotiations. We will also discuss competences, mandate, and skills of a future competent international authority, which would have to verify future elimination of nuclear weapons. And we are discussing ways of how to set up a system of scientific advice for the TPNW, both regarding technical elements, regarding verification, but also to provide scientific advice on what research and findings related to the humanitarian consequences and risks would be of relevance for the TPNW and the nuclear weapons discourse as a whole. Universalization of the treaty is an obligation for all states parties, and this is more than simply adding or counting new ratifications. We hope to agree on a set of concrete measures of how states parties, together with our civil society partners, can effectively promote the TPNW and its humanitarian rationale. And this includes, of course, taking the discussion to those who are currently still skeptical about the TPNW. And finally, we will also have to adopt rules of procedure for the work of the TPNW. And from what we from what we've heard from states parties so far, there is a clear wish to establish the TPNW as an avant-garde treaty that is open to civil society and outside expertise, in line with the inclusive and engaging way of how the negotiations took place, which are in sharp contrast to some of the other nuclear weapons related fora that we see. So we will also hope to adopt provisions that will be welcoming to the participation of observer states who wish to engage constructively with the TPNW community. So as you can see, our agenda at the first meeting of states parties is full, but I'm optimistic that we will have a successful meeting, of course, COVID permitting. The reason for my optimism is the very strong common sense of purpose that was evident so far among states parties, state signatories, as well as our partners from ICANN and the ICRC. We all realize the importance of setting the implementation of the TPNW up in a strong and serious way. Because getting to the TPNW was an amazing accomplishment, but now we are in a new phase. Now we have to make it work. All UN member states have been invited by the Secretary General to attend the conference. And TPNW states parties will welcome the participation also of states that currently do not support the treaty. We want, of course, and we need the engagement of those still skeptical and who are still holding on to the belief of the necessity of nuclear deterrence. States can, of course, maintain they do not want to accede to the TPNW, at least in the near term. However, there is no reason, and there's also no excuse, not to engage with the profound humanitarian arguments on which the TPNW rests. I certainly hope that many states that not yet support the TPNW will participate at the first meeting of states parties. And in that context, the recent announcement by the new government of Norway was, of course, extremely welcome. Dear participants, Olith has already referred to the pandemic. I also want to close with this. The COVID pandemic in particular has shown how vulnerable and how fragile our societies are, and how our collective security is in truth inextricably linked. The COVID virus will not wipe out humanity. A future pandemic, of course, may have this potential, but this virus will not wipe out humanity despite the serious problems that we are now facing. But nuclear weapons do have this potential. The experts of the doomsday clock, which of course goes back to Albert Einstein, have thus warned us when they set the doomsday clock at 100 seconds to midnight this year, that the pandemic of today must be a wake-up call to solve the nuclear weapons conundrum once and for all. And I strongly believe that the TPNW, with its cogent rationale, shows the way for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alexander. That was excellent that you outlined how important and interesting also the first meeting of states parties will be, and that you count on the input and participation of civil society in that meeting. And that's what we really need. And it was also extremely significant how much you, but also speakers before, underlined the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons cannot bring security, they can only bring death and suffering. And an organization that has witnessed this firsthand already in 1945, when nuclear weapons were dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is the International Committee of the Red Cross. And since those days, the ICRC is active in promoting nuclear disarmament, and it was also a very important driving force for bringing about the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Therefore, we are very glad to hear now from Helen Durham, the Director of International Law and Policy at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you very much, and it's a real delight to be here with such an eminent panel. I wanted to start by congratulating ICANN, Mayors for Peace, and of course the nuclear-free local authorities, not only for this event, but for the role played in the creation of this treaty, this new treaty. It's still new, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that we've all been talking about. Now, I think many of the speakers before me have talked about, I think, the really historic achievement of the entry into force of this treaty. So I won't take too much time in relation to that, but I just wanted to re-articulate the importance of having this global norm that explicitly prohibits the use, the threat of use, the development, the production, the stockpile, and the testing of one of the most terrifying and inhumane weapons we know has ever been created. And I think this powerful message goes beyond the legal framework about the moral unacceptability combined with the illegality under international law. And I think it's a really good step forward. I think it has also been mentioned by others. I think a unique element of this treaty, which we must hold on to, is the requirement of accountability to helping victims of testing and to clear contaminated areas. And as an Australian from far or other part of the world living currently in Geneva, I know, having spent time in the Pacific, what this means for communities. And I think this is an equally important element of the treaty. So we've been able to move to this new roadmap that I think provides a very clear and true vision of collective security, one that's no doubt more sustainable and more humane. And I think this shift is really important. As was mentioned, I think it's been a long journey, and thank you for mentioning the ICRC, along with our colleagues in the Japanese Red Cross, did witness firsthand 75 years ago, or longer than that, the unspeakable suffering of the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I think that really set us off over many, many decades of calling for what we've got to today. I think there's no doubt that the president of the ICRC in 2010, when he gave a call pushing very hard for a shift in the mind frame to see nuclear weapons more in a lens of humanitarian issues, away from just a military discourse, helped start off some of this work that we now see today. And I think I just wanted to remind everyone that in late 2011, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement adopted a very historic resolution which called on states to negotiate a legally binding instrument, particularly to prohibit the use of and complete eliminations of nuclear weapons. And I think there's a lot of work done by my colleagues in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement globally, millions of volunteers, which further galvanized the international efforts to advance the disarmament on humanitarian grounds, particularly leading up to and during the 3 humanitarian impact conferences in Oslo, in Mexico, and in Vienna. So I think this historic movement, of course, would not have occurred without the tireless efforts of civil society, our colleagues in ICANN, many, many members of civil society, and including, as I mentioned, colleagues in the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And I think I just wanted to take a moment to remind us, and I think I really love to hear from you, Alex. It was wonderful to hear that perhaps in something even technical like the rules of procedure, there'll be an acknowledgement of the strong role of civil society in the creation of these norms, the implementation, not just the pressure, but practical things can be done. And we all know that the Anti-Personnel Landmines Convention, often called the Ottawa Treaty, as well as the Convention on Cluster Munitions, were largely a result for this push of civil society, as well as the voice of the ICRC and others. And I think when I look across the international legal landscape, you also see the UN resolution, the Security Council Resolution 1325, on women, peace and security, which was done back in 2000. It was definitely the fruits of advocacy of efforts of coalitions of many non-government organizations. So I think we all agree that civil society is a key player in global governance. And I think this is really important. So what do we need to do perhaps in pushing forward, particularly through the wide network of civil society? What do we need to move forward? Well, I think, and it's been mentioned by many others, to keep the memory and the voice of the Hibasha alive. Their experiences, their determination, their courage has been a major driver towards nuclear disarmament. And I've experienced that myself. I've come across some fairly solid and what seemingly unmoving interlocutors. That's what we call in the ICRC those we engage with. And when they actually hear from the individuals, not only those who survived the attack, but also with our colleagues in the Japanese Red Cross, with the current generations on of impact, it can have a very persuasive effect. So we need to keep the human-centric nature of this debate in the centre. I think the second is we need to continue to educate the youth, who are often much more aware than we give them credit for. And a recent example of this is the ICRC did in the last year or so a big study called Millennials at War. And it was a survey of over 16,000 millennials from 16 countries and territories. And it showed that 84% of these young people believe the use of nuclear weapons is never acceptable. Now, that's a large percentage of young people that often we like to, or politicians like to say, they don't care about these issues. But I think we need to continue to work with the youth. And thirdly, and once again, I think this was mentioned, and it's great to hear, Alex, this is going to be part of the ongoing work in the States Party meeting. We need to continue to conduct research on the humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons. I think there's a lot of questions that remain, for example, around the disproportional gender impact of nuclear weapons. And we've started to look at issues such as the radiation on different types of bodies. I think we need to look more forcefully and have better evidence around the intergenerational impact of nuclear weapons. And I think also the impact of nuclear tests on affected communities around the world. So I think we need to keep the human-centered focus, continue to work with young people as well as many others, and look at some of these areas we need to gather more evidence. And I know that my colleagues in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and certainly those in the ICRC, in my Department of International Law and Policy, are working hard to promote the universalisation of this treaty, as well as provide technical assistance to states in their implementation of the TPNW obligations, including things such as model laws and model declaration, which we've developed and shared with states. And I think this technical element is a very important aspect as well. So just quickly to conclude, what are some of the expectations that we have as an international organisation for the upcoming important meeting of state parties? Now, I think it was mentioned, and that was wonderful to also mention, that together with the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaties, and the Regional Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Agreements, this TPNW is another essential building block for us to move forward to a world without nuclear weapons. And we do see it in the ICRC as a part of a whole wider infrastructure and framework. Now, obviously, the TPNW strengthens and moves us forward to the implementation of existing obligations. We all know about Article 6 for the obligation to disarmament. And so I think that we need to drive home this, I would say, as I said before, framework. But some of the other things that we in the ICRC will be looking forward to in the meeting of state parties, one is to ensure that the treaty's provisions have faithful implementation. The second, as was mentioned, to intensify our efforts and everyone's efforts to achieve the treaty's broadest possible adherence. And third goes back to my other point about striving to keep the testimonies of the Hibasha and others centre, so we can keep driving home the message of the catastrophic, unacceptable humanitarian consequences right in the centre of the debate. So I think the meeting of state parties, the first meeting, will be a crucial milestone. It should establish a framework of sound and effective treaty implementation, as mentioned previously, particularly around the positive obligations to redress the harm caused by nuclear weapons and their testing on people and the environment. And we do look forward to it. And last but not least, I think it'll be a time to take decisions on a number of issues highlighted in the treaty itself, from things such as the deadlines for the destruction or removal of nuclear weapons. So we strongly encourage and will continue to encourage states not yet parties to the treaty to attend the meeting as observers. And I also was very, very heartened to hear some of the other plan. So we have got a step forward. We've got a lot more work to do, but I think it is really magnificent that we can now change the discourse and talk about the fact that nuclear weapons are not a logical deterrence, but they're opportunities for mistakes, misunderstandings, and the capacity to drag the world to the brink of destruction. So we've got a treaty now with a clear signal. We've got work ahead of us in the first meeting of state parties, but I think where we're going allows us to imagine that we can end up in a world ultimately free from such inhumane weapons. So thank you for the opportunity to address you all, and I pass pass back to the chair to go on with our next speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helen, for a very rich presentation. And I also want to thank you on this occasion for the wonderful work that the ICRC is doing in promoting the treaty and its universalization. You stressed a lot how important it is to listen to the voices of the hibakushas, of the survivors of the nuclear bombing. And we are very glad that we have now the chance to listen to Mrs. Masako Wada, who is from Nagasaki, surviving victim of the nuclear bombing and a member of Hidankyo, the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organization. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you. Good afternoon all, and good deep evening from Japan. This is an honor to be able to share my and my mother's experience and my hope with you today as one of hibakusha in such a remarkable event. I want to express my thanks to Peace Boat Online Testimony Project. Every second counts for the survivors for connecting me with the event organizers. I am Masako Wada of Nihon Hidankyo, Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations. I would like to share with you a very personal story from the bombing. And I will discuss the worldwide movement to abolish nuclear weapons and what we can do together to achieve that. I was born in Nagasaki in 1943, so I'm one of the youngest hibakusha. I was 1 year and 10 months old when the bomb was detonated over my city. My house was 2.9 kilometers, 1.8 miles from the blast center. Thanks to the mountains, which somewhat shielded my house from the direct impact of the bomb, I'm still here. My mother used to tell me her story many times. My mother's atomic bomb experience. With a bomb explosion, the window panes, shoji paper screens, lattice doors, and clay walls had all crumbled into pieces by the blast. A pile of mud and dust over 1 foot thick was left on the floor. She saw an astonishing scene on the Brown Mountain side, a long black line moving downwards. It looked like a march of ants. There were burned and wounded people trying to escape the fires near the epicenter by coming over the mountain. They were almost naked, their hair stuck together with blood like horns. Many people might have died along the way. On August 15th, 1945, when World War II ended, She was sent to the auditorium of Nagasaki University to help the medical team treating the people sheltering there for burns or other wounds. No words can describe that scene of people lying all over the floor there. Taking antiseptic solution with her, she followed the doctor and treated each patient. But their wounds were so unbelievably severe that she ended up fainting after screaming, "Someone please take this antiseptic solution." Medical supplies were very valuable at that time. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself lying down on the floor as well. They said they didn't need a nurse like her, and she was sent to join the cleaning team. Numerous maggots as big as your thumb were swarming on the burns and wounds of the victims who were laid all over the floor of the college auditorium. Her job was to brush off the maggots from their body with a broom. She was 24 years old at that time. There was an empty plot of land next to our house because of building evacuation. In that empty lot, the dead were cremated from morning till night every day. The stench made her totally lose her appetite. Human remains packed into box-shaped garbage carts were continuously brought there. The workers collecting bodies from the street just held them by the limbs and throw them into the cart. Their hideously burned hands and feet stuck out as if they were dolls. People talked about the dead as if they were an everyday sight, saying, "There are lots today," or "There aren't so many today." Everybody became numb to what was happening. What is human dignity? Should human beings be treated like that? We are not created to be burned like garbage. This is just a little part of the account that I heard repeatedly from my mother. She passed away 10 years ago at the age of 89. She suffered from stomach cancer, liver cancer, and various other diseases, and had been hospitalized on and off 28 times. She seemed very unsatisfied when she read the account once I had recorded. The words couldn't capture her experience of hell on earth. I assume that other hibakusha would feel the same. I always feel hesitant to share my mother's experience with other people, as I know I can never fully describe what really happened. But now that 76 years have passed, the average of the survivors is 84, and we younger hibakusha must continue their work and speak out on their behalf. The deep suffering of those who barely survive continues to this day. Many of them suffered from burns and other injuries, as well as the after effects of radiation. Then there was the loss of loved ones, survivors' guilt, the scenes, sound, and the smells of the day burned into their memories, diseases of an unknown cause, economic hardship, discrimination in society due to misinformation about radiation exposure, and many broken dreams. On July 7th, 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of nuclear weapons was adopted at the UN conference. Hibakusha was overjoyed, thinking that our survival had been rewarded. A heavy and rusty door seemed to be opening, and we were finally seeing a ray of light, illuminating a path to achieving our goal. And this year, on January 22nd, the TPNW entered into force, which was based on the humanitarian consequences. The treaty provides tremendous hope and strength for us to promote our movement in the world. So far, 56 nations have ratified the treaty. And whether we can actually open the door more widely depends on the decision of governments, as well as the action of citizens urging decisions of their governments. I sincerely ask each one of you today, as political leaders, as members of civil society, as human beings with dignity, and as peacemakers, to raise your voices for the abolishment of nuclear weapons. There are those who created the atomic bombs and those who used them. And there are also those who were pleased by their destructive power and consequences. These people are absolutely unpardonable. But we Hibakusha have never wished to take vengeance on them. We know that if a nuclear weapon is to be used for the third time, there would be no one who would survive and rejoice about its devastation. In an atomic desert where nothing is left, who can be proud of the might of national power, status, or prestige? Nuclear weapons, which continue to be created on the pretexts of deterrence and not for actual use, are nothing but a negative human legacy. Power dictated by nuclear weapons is not justice. And what is required of us now is to disarm our hearts, pray, hold dialogue with people, and take action together. We Hibakusha pledge to use our remaining strength to work together with you. I was there 76 years ago, and I'm still here to tell you our ardent and sincere desire of all the Hibakusha. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Wada, for your powerful message, sharing also the personal experience of yourself and your mother with us. And of course, the nuclear bombs have been dropped over cities because the purpose was to terrorize and annihilate high numbers of civilians. And cities have also, on the other hand, an important role to play in bringing about nuclear disarmament. And the voices of mayors are important for also national politicians. And therefore, I want to pay respect to all those mayors who are engaged in Mayors for Peace or I Can Cities appeal, appealing to their own governments concerning nuclear disarmament and joining the TPNW. And in a country where there is some progress, I'm speaking of Norway, we have seen that the new government has, as part of the government platform, the announcement that Norway will take part as an observer in the first meeting of states parties. It's the first NATO country that does so, and certainly we hope that many more, and also Japan, will follow. And therefore, it's extremely good that we have with us today the Mayor of Oslo, Mrs. Marianne Borgen. You have the floor.
Well, thank you so much. Dear friends of peace, as the Mayor of Oslo, the host city of the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm really delighted to take part in this webinar. I was myself overjoyed when I can receive the prize, the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo City Hall in 2017. On January the 22nd this year, we again had reasons to celebrate here in Oslo. On that day, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons became a legally binding international agreement, and I, myself, held an appeal in front of the Norwegian Parliament, along with the former Prime Minister of Norway, to call on our national parliamentarians to endorse the treaty. Even though municipalities in Norway rarely take a stand when it comes to questions related to foreign policies, leaving such questions to the national government, a large majority of our city council here in Oslo voted in favor of encouraging the Norwegian government to sign the treaty in 2019 as a response to Eiken's city's appeal. A growing number of Norwegian municipalities have also endorsed this initiative, which I'm very proud of and very happy for. The reason for that is, of course, that this is a question that are of utmost importance for cities, because we know, as the speaker already had told us, that cities are the main targets of nuclear weapons. We believe the threat that nuclear weapons represent to humanity cannot be exaggerated. Nuclear weapons are designed to kill. They have no other purpose. In a blink of an eye, a nuclear detonation would wipe a metropolitan center off the map, laying waste to countless lives and poisoning the environment. In a world with growing tension between the nuclear states, cities must take a stand and must be heard. We need a ban on all nuclear weapons. And our involvement as cities matters, and it will, in the long run, influence national governments. I'm convinced of that. In September this year, we had our national elections here in Norway, paving the way for a new majority in the national parliament. And a week ago, a new minority government took over. It is a government coalition between the Norwegian Labour Party and the Centre Party. But the majority in the national parliament is very optimistic. It consists of the red-green parties. And this coalition in the government will have to cooperate also with my party, which is the Socialist Left Party here in Norway. Even though I would have hoped for more ambitions from our new government, I already see some steps in the right direction. In the new government's platform, they declare that they will, and I will quote from that, they will increase Norway's efforts for nuclear disarmament, take initiative to focus on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and work with other countries within and outside the NATO for a world without nuclear arms, end of quote. I don't believe that these lines would have entered the government's platform without involvement from municipalities and NGOs all over Norway. I can promise you that we will follow closely how the government puts this into life. As you have already mentioned, Norway is also now the first NATO country to confirm that we will participate as an observer at state party meetings to the UN Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This sends, in my opinion, a strong signal to our allies that nuclear arms are unacceptable. By participating as an observer at the state party meetings to the UN Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the new Norwegian government demonstrates its support of the intentions of the prohibition of nuclear arms. This is, in my opinion, an important step in the direction of Norway's joining the treaty. It also sends a clear signal to other NATO countries that it is possible to be a loyal NATO ally and at the same time work for prohibition and abolishment of nuclear arms. I strongly hope and expect that the new government will put in place measures to enable a Norwegian accession to the UN Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and also take the initiative to diplomatic dialogue with other NATO countries on how they together can join the treaty. So thanks to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, it should be clear to all governments that these arms are illegitimate and unacceptable. It is immoral to possess, produce, threaten with, or make use of nuclear weapons. So I am encouraged by what we have achieved so far as cities, and we also must continue joining forces to persuade our respective national governments to sign the treaty. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Borgen. You have given a testimony how effective the engagement of local authorities can be. And congratulations that you made it so far. As you said, it's just the first step, but it's going in the right direction. And I'm sure people like yourself will push for further steps. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
And we all hope, of course, that Germany would be perhaps the second country to announce in the government platform the participation at the meeting of states parties. And in Germany, a leader among the local authorities is the city of Hanover. So therefore, we are particularly happy to have here today with us the first deputy mayor of Hanover, Mr. Thomas Hermann. The floor is yours.
Can you put the camera on? Oh. So, yes, good afternoon, dear friends, and congratulations to Norway for this wonderful step. I will talk about Hanover and the German activities of Mayors for Peace. Hanover, as a sister city of Hiroshima, has a special responsibility for peace, and that's why Hanover has also been active in the Mayors for Peace network from the very beginning, as vice president, as executive city and lead city for Germany. Due to their outstanding economic power and infrastructure, cities continue to be preferred targets in the event of nuclear attack, as Marianne said also. Therefore, I think it's our duty as mayors to do everything possible to protect our residents from such a disaster. With broad public relation efforts, discussion events on security policy topics, a regular exchange with the German Foreign Office, international youth encounters, participation in international conferences, and in intensive networking within the European chapter of Mayors for Peace, Hanover is lobbying for peace on a national, European, and international level. Through their involvement in the network, over 700 municipalities in Germany are making an important contribution to preserving peace in the world. This is city diplomacy in action, and this is our way to bring TPNW to the public and the civil society. Being part of the European chapter of Mayors for Peace is very important to us because, in our opinion, it is necessary that Europe formulates its security policy interests together, becomes visible, and advances nuclear disarmament. And by together, I also mean that we must seek dialogue with Russia. In our view, it is absolutely essential to remain in dialogue at the city level. Hanover was among the first cities to join the Icon Cities Appeal in 2019. The City Council decided to sign the appeal in April 2019. I think this was a very positive signal that shows our work in the Mayors for Peace network is also supported by a great majority of the political groups in our council. Hanover also hosted the Mayors for Peace Executive Conference in 2019. In this context, we invited the public to an evening event. Against the backdrop of the then expired INF Treaty, we dealt with the following questions. Will there be a renaissance of nuclear weapons, or is security perhaps only possible in a world without nuclear weapons? Beatrice Finn was our guest, and she was very clear about the opportunities that lie in the TPNW, but also that a lot of support is still needed for it to come into force. Well, I think the lobbying of Mayors for Peace in Germany and worldwide was successful because since January 2021, this treaty has now entered into force. And now it's about the next steps, namely to get as many states as possible, first as observers and then as signatories to this treaty. For this region, Hanover, as a lead city of Germany, together with almost all state capitals, wrote to the German Foreign Minister welcoming the entry into force of this treaty in 2021. In addition, the mayors expressed their wish that nuclear disarmament achieve visible results in this year and also in the future. As you may know, in Germany we celebrate the so-called Flag Day on July the 8th every year, commemorating the 1996 opinion of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which found that the treaty and the use of nuclear weapons in general violates international law. This year, on this occasion, the German Mayors for Peace called the German government for its participation as an observer in the first conference of the parties in Vienna next year, and subsequently, to join this treaty. We are confident that the new German government will take this request seriously and in the end, support the treaty of the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We, as German Mayors for Peace, will continue to take action and show great commitment for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. First Deputy Mayor, for sharing the activities of the city of Hanover. We now will go to Scotland. You know, Scotland, unlike the UK government in London, is in favor of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we'll hear now from Glasgow City Councillor Fergal Dalton, who also has shown strong personal commitment for the cause. It seems to me we have a technical problem in the connection with Glasgow City Councillor Fergal Dalton.
Hello, Thomas, can you hear me?
Oh, here you are. That's wonderful to see you and hear you. Please.
Yeah. Okay, don't know what the problem was there, but thankfully it's rectified. So thank you, Thomas and Feskema at Glasgow. Good afternoon from Glasgow. I'm happy to report it's a very typically sunny Glasgow day here. And thank you for inviting the city to this great event. Thank you to those who've organised the event and those who've spoken and those attending. I'm speaking today on behalf of Glasgow City Council, where I am one of the elected representatives, one of the councillors. but I am also the convener of NFLA Scotland. Today is Trafalgar Day, the anniversary of the Battle of Trafalgar, a proud day in the history of the Royal Navy. It is also my daughter's 12th birthday, which I'm happy to report I did not forget. But I mentioned Trafalgar because I am a Royal Navy veteran. I spent 15 years in the submarine service as a weapons engineer. And in my last appointment, I was in charge of nuclear weapons, the Trident system. I had my finger on Britain's nuclear button, or trigger as it is. I have to say, as a former nuclear weapons operator, I did find Masako's testimony particularly poignant. As a military person, I do find what's happening in Norway as a really great development, because Scotland is also looking to be a loyal NATO member while still being an ardent opponent of nuclear weapons. So well done to our friends in Norway. I was very proud last May to move the resolution in Glasgow City Council supporting TPNW, and I was delighted that it received cross-party support. In fact, every party supported it except the Conservative Party. I had tabled the resolution on several occasions over the past few years, but owing to how Glasgow City Council does its business, the resolution was only moved in May. But better late than never, and Glasgow now joins other local authorities in Scotland in supporting this treaty. The argument is often made that Britain's nuclear weapons could not be kept in England because they would be too close to population centres. But Faslane and Coulport, where Britain's nuclear weapons are kept in Scotland, are less than 50 kilometres west of Glasgow city centre. And considering the prevailing winds we have here in the west of Scotland, Glasgow would very likely be subjected to the full impact of any nuclear accident. But of course, Glasgow doesn't just need to contend with the proximity of Faslane and Coulport. Britain transports its nuclear weapons by road convoys, so nuclear weapons regularly pass through our towns and cities. As Glasgow prepares to host COP26, it is worth noting that we have a proud history of making a stand on international issues. In 1981, we awarded Nelson Mandela the freedom of our city. I was a child growing up in Dublin at the time, and I remember thinking that Glasgow must be a really great place. I didn't know, obviously, my future lay in this great city. And in Dublin, staff in Dunstore supermarkets at the time were making a stand by refusing to handle South African fruit. And Nelson Mandela has been back to Glasgow to accept the freedom of our great city. Glasgow continues to make a stand on many issues, such as support for the Palestinian people or nuclear disarmament. As you mentioned, Thomas, the Scottish government is opposed to nuclear weapons, but it is also opposed, as is Scotland, to Brexit, and we know how that's going. Some people believe there is a British route to nuclear disarmament. I'm happy to be proven wrong, and I sincerely wish these people very well. But as someone who has worked within the British nuclear weapon program and delivered it, I can assure you there is no British route to nuclear disarmament. The only way we will rid Scotland of nuclear weapons is through Scottish independence, which is why, for me, the cause of nuclear disarmament is inextricably linked to the cause of Scottish independence. And we know there is no feasible option for relocating Britain's nuclear weapons. So when we start the nuclear disarmament program after Scottish independence, we will, in effect, be starting Britain's nuclear disarmament. And yes, I will be looking to go back into nuclear weapons, only this time it will be to disarm them. Thank you. Agus Banach J. of Gilair, God bless, and best wishes to you all.
Thank you so much also for the personal commitment and testimony that you gave, and for underlining that cities that are in proximity to nuclear weapons installations are particularly endangered. We are all endangered by nuclear weapons, but certainly a first strike might go there. So we have heard now from 3 cities, and we always stress how important the role of civil society is And therefore, we absolutely wanted to have Beatrice Fien, the Executive Director of ICANN, as a speaker. Where we are listening to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And it's been such a great event so far, and a real pleasure and honor for ICANN to join with the UK and Ireland nuclear-free local authorities and the European chapter of Mayors for Peace in holding this online conference. And I just want to say a special thanks to Helena Mayer and Sean Morris for all the hard work behind the scenes of pulling this together. It's been a really, really great event. I also, of course, want to start by thanking and giving credit to Mayor Joseph Mayoral from Granollers for his leadership as a mayor of a true city of peace, as well as the success for this still very young European chapter of Mayors of Peace. It's a pleasure to continue to work with you. And ICANN has really deeply appreciated a close cooperation and friendship with Mayors for Peace for many years now, especially on raising awareness of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and the ICANN Cities Appeal. And the success of all of these three streams of work would not have been achieved without Mayors for Peace. And it's just as some wrap-up comments, it's been such a great honor to hear from these amazing speakers. And I hope I'm not the only one who feels really energized and enthusiastic after hearing all of this. I want to particularly thank Masako Wada for her bravery and activism as someone who's personally experienced the horror and injustice of nuclear weapons. And it's really your work, Masako, that inspires us and drives us forward. So thank you so much for everything you do. And I also want to thank the diplomats and dignitaries from Malta, the Holy See, and Ireland who spoke here today. Of course, the TPNW was negotiated and concluded, and it's being signed and ratified by diplomats, and this treaty would have never become a reality without the courage, intelligence, and skill of government officials all around the world. And it's really heartening to see this support and see these three countries really taking Article 14 of universalization very serious by talking about universalization here today. We also heard from a great champion of the treaty, Helen Durham of the ICRC. And the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement has been an active and outspoken advocate for the horrors and a champion for raising awareness of the horrors of nuclear weapons ever since 1945. And we're really grateful and thank you for the continued work that the ICRC and the Red Cross movement is doing, for always reminding the world that any discussion around nuclear weapons must be rooted in humanitarian principles and centered around international law. And of course, it was also a great pleasure to hear Ambassador Alex Kment, whose more than capable hands the first meeting of states parties rests. And we're really grateful for both your personal and Austria's tireless commitment to humanitarian disarmament. And really, all of ICANN, on behalf of all ICANN, we're very excited about going to Vienna next year, and I'm looking forward to achieve something really great there. And of course, finally, I want to give my huge thanks and congratulations to Mayor Borgen, Deputy Mayor Herman, and Glasgow City Councillor Dalton for speaking to the role of cities here today in challenging nuclear weapons, and for your continued support for the ICANN Cities Appeal. Because the story of nuclear weapons began with cities. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the true nature of the horror of nuclear weapons was revealed. And they are, by design, city destroyers, meant to wreak the maximum amount of carnage possible and destroy everything and everyone in their path. And this is really what nuclear weapons were always intended to do. And of course, any use of nuclear weapons is unacceptable and immoral, but it is especially revealing that the main targets of these weapons are still urban areas with high population densities. And that is really what is at the core of the misguided and dangerous philosophy of nuclear deterrence. Cities, towns, and local authorities are champions in challenging the world's most urgent existential issues. We see it on the climate change front. We see it in tackling the urban violence around the world. And of course, now we're seeing it as well in nuclear disarmament. And the role of local government is absolutely essential for the success of the TPNW, especially in countries where national governments claim to rely on nuclear weapons for their security. And local governments form a close and active link with their constituents and local social movements and can play a game-changing role in breaking the unacceptable status quo in nuclear weapons policy. And it's not a coincidence that we've seen so many cities and towns in Norway join the ICANN Cities Appeal, which certainly contributed to the announcement of Norway recently to become an observer state to the first meeting of states parties. And that's also why it's so heartening to see over, I think it's now 137 German cities that have joined the ICANN Cities Appeal. And that certainly is shaping and influencing the progress in Germany, where we hope we will achieve results to see a similar commitment from there. So we in ICANN, I mean, we see concretely right now the huge importance that the work of cities have. And we're really thrilled to have allies like Mayor Borgen, Deputy Mayor Herman, Councillor Dalton, of course, Mayor Mayoral, who will be speaking next after me. And we do look forward to working with you all as we approach this hugely important and very exciting moment of the first meeting of states parties in Vienna. So thank you all, and it's been really a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you so much, Bear. It's great to listen to you as always. And now we will come to the closing comments by the chair of the European chapter of Mayors for Peace, Mayor Josep Mayoral of Granollers. And since he will address us not in English, please be so kind and switch now to English translation. Thank you. You have the floor. Tienes la palabra, Josep.
Muchas gracias. No sé por qué no puedo conectar el vídeo. En todo caso, ¿me oyen? Sí, ahora. Sí. Sí. Muy buenos días. Espero que se me oiga bien. Tenía algunos problemas de conexión. En primer lugar, manifestar que para mí hoy es un día emocionante. La segunda vez que alcaldes y alcaldesas por la paz de Europa organizan un webinar y lo hacen con un programa espléndido, con unas ponencias extraordinarias, con la voz de mucha gente, de alcaldes, alcaldesas, de diplomáticos, de responsables de los gobiernos. En definitiva, la expresión nítida, clara de una organización de alcaldes por la paz que en Europa tiene una voz propia, una voz fuerte, una voz directa y que tiene mucho interés en reflexionar alrededor de nuestros problemas como continente, ¿no? Problemas nucleares que debatimos hace un año en un webinar parecido y ahora especialmente analizar el trabajo del itinerario hacia la conferencia que se va a celebrar en Viena sobre prohibición de las armas nucleares. Cuando analizamos el número de países que han firmado el tratado, nos damos cuenta que Europa solamente ha aportado a 5 países, ¿no? Irlanda, Malta, Ciudad del Vaticano, Austria y San Marino. Muy pocos países, demasiados pocos, ¿no? Y por tanto ya en Hanover, cuando nos constituimos como sección europea de alcaldes por la paz, adoptamos un compromiso que es trabajar municipio a municipio, ciudad a ciudad, para reclamar a los gobiernos de nuestros estados que firmaran el tratado. Sabemos que es un trabajo duro, sabemos que es un trabajo difícil, porque hay que romper este cordón que los países más militarizados y especialmente los países nucleares sitúan en nuestro mapa, ¿no? Pero somos ya muchas las ciudades europeas que nos hemos pronunciado. Somos muchas ciudades europeas que hemos pedido a nuestros presidentes y a nuestros parlamentos que firmen el Tratado de Prohibición de Armas Nucleares. Ahora se trata de comprometernos también juntos y juntas hacia un camino, hacia un itinerario, hacer de Viena, hacer del mes de marzo en Viena una cita fundamental para la construcción del futuro en paz que queremos, el futuro sin armas nucleares. Y por eso Noruega ha abierto un camino. Se trata de que todos aquellos países europeos que no han firmado el tratado vayan a Viena como observadores. Lo pediremos desde cada una de nuestras ciudades. Nosotros trabajaremos para que el gobierno de España esté como observador en Viena. Nos parece fundamental de que nadie quede ajeno a este movimiento tan importante, ¿no? Una segunda cuestión que les propongo es que Viena sea también en marzo la cita de los alcaldes por la paz de Europa y del mundo. Sería muy importante organizar conjuntamente y al lado de la conferencia que se va a celebrar en Viena una convención de alcaldes y alcaldesas que se sumen a este tratado, que animen a este tratado y que expresen la voluntad y la fuerza del municipalismo mundial para caminar hacia un mundo sin armas nucleares. Y también nos proponemos, como alcaldes por la paz europeos, pedirle al Parlamento Europeo que se pronuncie y que esté presente también como observador, si lo desea, en Viena, para que también la Unión Europea como conjunto forme parte de este trabajo. Es momento de suma, ¿no? de alianzas entre ayuntamientos, entre alcaldes, entre alcaldesas, pero especialmente de alianzas entre el mundo local, las comunidades locales y la sociedad civil. Desde este punto de vista, el liderazgo de ICANN es imprescindible. Acordar con ICANN trabajos para alcaldes por la paz es fundamental. Hemos avanzado juntos con el liderazgo de Beatriz Finn y vamos a seguir alentando esta capacidad de la gente de paz de generar alternativas a partir de la voluntad de hacer de la palabra, del diálogo, del consenso, el instrumento que pueda romper estos cordones militares, estos cordones nucleares que están marcando un itinerario que no deseamos. Por tanto, les emplazo a trabajar duramente para que todos nuestros países estén presentes como observadores, aquellos que no hayan firmado, a seguir insistiendo para que firmen un tratado de prohibición de armas nucleares y especialmente les emplazo a que los municipios, los alcaldes, las alcaldesas estemos en Viena al lado de ICANN y al lado especialmente de nuestros ciudadanos y nuestras ciudadanas para expresar con fortaleza y con nitidez nuestro compromiso para construir un mundo más justo, un mundo más libre, un mundo libre de violencias, un mundo libre de armas nucleares. Noruega ha marcado un camino, yo le agradezco muy especialmente a la alcaldesa de Oslo su presencia. Este es un camino muy interesante, el primer país de la OTAN que ha explicado, que ha afirmado que estará en Viena. Yo creo y espero que este camino lo sigan otros estados. Querría terminar mis palabras agradeciendo el trabajo de toda la gente que ha estado organizando este fantástico webinar y también, si me permitís, agradecer muy especialmente la fantástica conducción que ha hecho Tomás de todas estas sesiones, de todos estos parlamentos. Por tanto, muchas gracias por vuestra presencia, gracias por el impulso que ha dado al movimiento europeo por la paz este seminario y vamos a caminar para hacer de Viena un hito, un punto clave para la construcción del futuro. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, José. Thank you for the closing remarks. You have shown the way. I think it's very important that local authorities engage with their governments in order to bring them to Vienna especially in cases where those countries have not a favorable view of the treaty still. And I just want to thank everyone who has participated in this webinar, and especially Jean, Helena, Daniel, and Manuel for making it possible. So we have a task to do. We have to work hard that many European countries participate in Vienna, and looking forward to meet you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.